You are hereby fined $50,000 for an unsightly impoundment structure on your property.
That's the letter the HOA president slid into my mailbox on a Tuesday in May. The structure was an 1872 earthen dam my great-great-grandfather built to power a grist mill. The mill has run on this property for 153 years. The fine was a fabrication. Lucinda Marbury wanted the dam gone, so her husband's development company could build 30 luxury homes on the dewatered pond bed. So I did what she asked. I filed the proper Vermont stream alteration permit. I removed the dam legally over 3 days. Then a 25-year storm event dumped 5 inches of rain on the Lamoille watershed in July. 23 Maplebrook Reserve homes flooded that night. The dam she had demanded I remove was the only thing that had been protecting them. Tell me below, would you have fought the fine in court or filed the permit? The Withington place sits on the south bank of Beaver Branch in northern Lamoille County, Vermont, 12 miles east of the village of Hyde Park, on a town road that has been called Withington Mill Road since 1884. 180 acres of mixed northern hardwood, sugar maple, beech, yellow birch, hemlock, running from the high ground above the mill pond down to the alder swamp where the branch meets the lower Lamoille tributary. The center of the property is a 14-foot earthen dam my great-great-grandfather, Hosea Withington, built in 1872 to power a grist mill he ran commercially until 1958. The mill still runs. I rebuilt it between 1990 and 2005 with my own hands, and I run it every Saturday from May through October as a heritage demonstration site for the Vermont Historical Society. My great-great-grandfather bought the original parcel in 1804 with the savings from 6 years of carriage building in Brattleboro. The deed has been in the family for 221 years. I'm Beckett Withington. I'm 64. I worked 30 years as a master millwright restoring water-powered mills across New England. Grist mills, sawmills, woolen mills, and the occasional fulling mill. I sat on the Vermont Historical Society's Preservation Board from 2008 to 2022. I drafted the state's millwright apprenticeship curriculum in 2014. I retired from active restoration work in 2022, though I still consult on 3 or 4 projects a year for the New England Mill Preservation Alliance. My first wife, May, passed in November of 1996 from ovarian cancer. She was 36. Our son Tarquin was 8 years old. I raised him alone in the mill house for the next 22 years. In 2016, I married Neve, who was widowed in 2010 when her husband Declan succumbed to multiple sclerosis after a long fight. Neve ran the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association for 28 years and retired the same year I did. She is 57. She makes our maple syrup every March on a wood-fired evaporator her late father built in 1962. She wears a wool barn coat that belonged to her grandfather and a pair of leather work gloves she got for her birthday in 1989. Tarquin is now 36. He is an artisan blacksmith. He lives in the converted carriage house at the back of the property and forges replacement parts for working mills across New England: gears, pinions, pintles, Watergate hardware. He has May's eyes and my hands. Neve's daughter Aoife is 28, lives in Boston, and works as an associate at a Beacon Hill law firm. She visits at Thanksgiving and on the second Saturday of every August for sugar on snow at the mill. In the spring of 2019, a developer named Quentin Marbury broke ground on a luxury subdivision called Maplebrook Reserve at Lamoille Falls. The development sits on a 63-acre parcel 3/4 of a mile downstream from our dam, on the south side of the lower Lamoille tributary, where it widens into a slower-moving pool. 80 homes, brick fronts, white columns, a community kayak dock at the bottom of the development. Quentin Marbury's wife, Lucinda, took over the Maplebrook Reserve HOA presidency the day Phase 1 handed over to the residents in 2020. She drove a pearl-white Range Rover Velar with a Maplebrook Reserve sticker on the rear window and a vanity plate that said, Lucinda M. She introduced herself to me in the summer of 2020 by way of a polite letter suggesting we coordinate stream management between our properties. I wrote her a polite letter back, saying my dam had been managing the stream since 1872 and required no coordination. That was the last polite letter I received from Lucinda Marbury. The first formal complaint from the Maplebrook Reserve HOA arrived in October of 2021. It was titled, Notice of Adjacent Watershed Management Concern. It cited my mill pond's water level as fluctuating in a manner inconsistent with downstream community aesthetic expectations. It requested that I coordinate with the HOA board to maintain a consistent visual pond elevation through the summer months. I read it twice. The water level in a Vermont mill pond fluctuates by design. The dam has a stepped sluice gate that releases water at controlled rates to feed the mill wheel when it is operating, and to maintain healthy summer flow when it is not. The level varies by 8 to 14 inches over the course of any given summer, depending on rainfall, evaporation, and how many tours I am running through the mill. I wrote Lucinda Marbury a polite letter back, explaining the basic hydraulics of a Vermont grist mill operation. She did not reply. What I received the following March was a second letter. This one was on Maplebrook Reserve HOA letterhead. It demanded that I voluntarily lower my mill pond by 30 inches in the interest of maintaining downstream view corridors and reducing visual stagnation at the upper edge of community property. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my dam, my pond, or my mill. The HOA had no easement, no contract, and no Vermont statutory authority of any kind to demand that I lower water levels on my own land. The letter was, in every meaningful sense, a fiction. I declined the request. In June of 2022, the Maplebrook Reserve HOA newsletter ran a piece titled "Adjacent Watershed Tensions, a Note from Your Board." It described, in a soft cursive font, a longtime adjacent landowner whose continued refusal to coordinate watershed management has created uncertainty about the visual integrity of the community's lower meadow corridor. It did not name me. It didn't have to. By the end of 2022, 3 Maplebrook Reserve residents had taken to driving past the foot of my driveway in their boats that they would launch at the community kayak dock and pole upstream until they bumped against the spillway of my dam. Each of them would photograph the dam, photograph the pond, photograph the mill, and drive home. None of them spoke to me. In April of 2023, the first formal HOA fine arrived in my mailbox. It was a citation for unauthorized obstruction of community waterway access, assessed at $5,000 under what the HOA's board claimed was Vermont Title 24, Chapter 113, Section 4419, which is a real section of Vermont statute that addresses municipal nuisance ordinances and has no application to private dams or private mills. I drove down the road to my attorney Cormac Twombly's office in Morristown. Cormac is 68. He grew up in Lamoille County. His father was a county sheriff in the 1970s. Cormac has been practicing Vermont property and water law for 43 years and has the kind of quiet, dry humor that defines a certain kind of Vermont attorney who has read every section of Title 24 at least 3 times. He read the citation. He laughed for 9 seconds. He said, "Beckett, they're trying to scare you. Don't pay it. Don't respond to it. Let them try to enforce it. They cannot." I followed his advice. In November of 2023, a second fine arrived. Citation for watershed nuisance creation at $10,000. Same fictitious statutory citation. Same non-existent authority. In February of 2024, a third fine. Citation for obstinate refusal to coordinate community standards at $15,000. In April of 2024, Lucinda Marbury herself drove up the Withington Mill Road in her Range Rover and parked at the foot of my driveway. She did not come up. She sat in her vehicle for 35 minutes. She filmed the mill, the pond, and the dam with her iPhone. Neve watched her from the kitchen window with a cup of black coffee. Neve did not say anything. She walked to the wood stove. She added 1 stick of yellow birch. She walked back to the window. She said, "Beckett, that woman wants something she has no right to." I told her I knew. 3 weeks later, the 4th fine arrived, the largest yet. A consolidated administrative penalty assessed at $50,000, formally noticed for filing as a property lien with the Lamoille County Clerk if not paid within 30 days. The letter was signed by Lucinda Marbury, President, Maplebrook Reserve, HOA. I read it standing in the mill house kitchen, with the back door open and the sound of the dam spillway running steadily across the yard. I called Cormac Twombly. I said, "Cormac, they're filing a lien." He said, "Beckett, now we get strategic." Cormac Twombly drove out to the Withington place the next morning at 9. He brought a thermos of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the kind of leather portfolio I had not seen open since 1998. He sat at the kitchen table with Neve and me. He drank 1 cup of coffee. He listened to me read all 4 fines aloud in order. When I finished, he said one sentence. "Beckett, you are not the target of these fines. The dam is the target. They want it gone." I asked him why. He drove me into Morristown that afternoon. We sat in the second-floor records room of the Lamoille County Clerk's office for 4 hours. Cormac knew exactly where to look. He had, over 43 years of practice, developed a particular relationship with the deeds, Planning Commission records, and Vermont Agency of Natural Resources stream alteration files for the Lamoille watershed. He pulled the original 2018 development permit application for Maplebrook Reserve at Lamoille Falls. Maplebrook Reserve LLC, Principal Quentin Marbury, had filed the original permit application with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, Watershed Management Division, on March 14th of 2018. The application required a flood hydrology study under Vermont Stream Alteration Rule 4.0 because the development was located within a 100-year regulatory floodplain along the lower Lamoille tributary. The hydrology study was attached as Exhibit B to the permit application. The hydrology study had been prepared by a firm called Northeast Floodplain Consulting, based out of Manchester, New Hampshire. The study modeled the lower Lamoille tributary's discharge characteristics under various storm return intervals. The study concluded that the development site was protected from 100-year flood inundation by permanent upstream impoundment structures, providing approximately 11 hours of peak flow attenuation. The permanent upstream impoundment structures were, in the language of the study, the Withington Mill Pond Dam, 1872, Lamoille County, Vermont Dam, inventory number LM-1872-014, classified low hazard by Vermont ANR Dam Safety Program. My dam. Quentin Marbury had filed a flood hydrology study in 2018 that explicitly relied on my dam to protect his development from 100-year flooding. The ANR permit had been issued on that basis. 80 homes had been built on that basis. 80 Vermont families had moved into the lower Lamoille flood corridor on the basis of a hydrology study that assumed my dam would remain in place. Now Quentin's wife was filing $50,000 fines demanding I remove the dam. Cormac set down his reading glasses on the records table. He said, "Beckett, either Quentin doesn't know what's in his own permit, or he does, and he's gambling." I asked Cormac what Quentin would have to gain. Cormac pulled a second set of records. Maplebrook Reserve, LLC, had filed a preliminary Phase 2 development plan with the Lamoille County Planning Commission in September of 2023. The plan contemplated 30 additional luxury, lakefront estate homes on a 60-acre parcel immediately upstream of Phase 1. The plan referred to the 60-acre parcel as the Upper Meadow. The 60-acre parcel was, on the proposed Phase 2 site plan, located directly on top of what was currently the bed of my mill pond. The plan assumed the pond would not exist by 2026. It assumed my dam would be gone. I sat in the records room of the Lamoille County Clerk's office, with my own breath sounding loud in my ears. Cormac said, "Beckett, they are trying to drive you to remove your own dam so they can develop the dewatered pond bed. They never planned to enforce the fines. They were trying to make you cave." I asked him what would happen if I did remove the dam. He looked at me for a long second. He said, "If you remove the dam properly, under a Vermont Stream Alteration Permit, with ANR oversight, with full documentation, your liability would be zero. The development downstream, however, would be sitting in a 100-year flood corridor, with no upstream attenuation. The next major storm event would flood Phase 1. He paused. He said, "Beckett, they have given you a $50,000 invitation to do exactly that." I did not answer immediately. I sat with it. Then I said one sentence. "Cormac, let's accept the invitation." I called Thora Westbrook the next morning. Thora had been the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources Dam Safety Program Director for 19 years. She was 61. She and I had worked together on the inspection and certification of 17 historic mill dams across the state between 2009 and 2022. She knew the Withington Dam by inventory number, by structural type, by spillway capacity, and by date of last inspection. She owed me precisely 2 favors for the 2 times I had pulled my Saturday afternoons to help her train new dam inspectors at restoration sites. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for 9 full seconds. She said, "Beckett, are you sure?" I told her yes. She told me to expect the Vermont Stream Alteration Permit application packet by courier that Friday. She told me she would assign it to her most experienced staff engineer, a woman named Tamsin Holyoke, who specialized in heritage dam removals. She told me Tamsin would walk the site with me by the end of the following week. I asked Thora one more question. I asked her what would happen, hydrologically, to the lower Lamoille tributary downstream of my dam if I removed it. She thought about it for a long minute. She said, Beckett, under a 50-year storm event, the lower tributary would jump its banks at Maplebrook Reserve's southern boundary. Some of the homes built at the lowest elevations would flood, possibly 20 to 30 of them, depending on the storm and the time of year. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table with Neve. I said, Neve, if I take down the dam, 20 to 30 Maplebrook Reserve homes will flood the next time we get a 50-year storm. She drank her coffee. She thought about it. She said, Beckett, they built their homes in a flood corridor on the assumption that your dam would always be there. They were the ones who lied to the state to get the permit. They were the ones who fined you $50,000 to make the dam disappear. They have spent 4 years pushing you toward this. Are you their conscience? I did not say anything. She poured me a fresh cup. She said, Beckett, take down the dam. Do it properly. Do it on the record. Let the state issue the permit. Let nature take the next step. I called Cormac Twombly the next morning and told him to proceed. The Vermont Stream Alteration Permit application packet arrived from ANR by FedEx that Friday. Cormac and I spent 12 hours over the weekend completing it. Thora's staff engineer Tamsin Holyoke walked the dam with me on Tuesday morning. She measured the embankment, photographed the spillway, took core samples of the earth structure, and surveyed the upstream pond bathymetry. She submitted her field report Wednesday. The stream alteration permit was approved 6 weeks later, on the 14th of June, with a recommended dam removal schedule of late summer. By the end of June, Lucinda Marbury knew. I do not know how she found out. The ANR permit was a matter of public record. The Lamoille County Clerk's Office had been filing it. Probably one of her HOA board members had been checking the records to confirm the lien was proceeding. Either way, on a Wednesday in late June, Quentin Marbury himself drove up the Withington Mill Road in a black Lexus GX460 and parked in front of my mailbox at 3:15 in the afternoon. He got out. He was 56, salt and pepper hair, polo shirt over chinos, country club tan. He walked up to my mailbox. He did not come up to the house. He stood at the foot of the driveway. He waited until he saw me on the porch. He called out across the gravel, Beckett, we need to talk. I walked down to the mailbox. I did not invite him onto the property. He said, Beckett, I understand you filed a permit to remove your dam. I have. That dam protects my development. I know it does, Quentin. Your hydrology study said so in 2018. I read it last month. His face went the color of wet cement. He stood at the mailbox for a long moment. He looked at the dam. He looked at me. He looked back at the dam. He said, Beckett, I'll buy out the fines. I'll cancel the lien. I'll have Lucinda issue a written retraction. Please, don't take down the dam. I looked at him. I said, Quentin, have your wife send me a written retraction of all 4 fines, signed and notarized, by close of business Friday. If she does not, the dam comes out on August 15th as scheduled. I turned around. I walked back up the gravel. Lucinda Marbury did not send a retraction. On the morning of July 8th, 3 weeks before the scheduled dam removal, a man named Hobart Twining called me at 7:15 in the morning. Hobart was 67. He had served 2 years on the Maplebrook Reserve HOA board after moving to Vermont from Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 2022. He had been a regional vice president at an insurance company for 28 years before he retired. He had recently been pushed off the HOA board in a board reshuffle Lucinda had engineered to install loyalists. He had heard from a sympathetic resident that I had filed a permit to remove the dam. He said, Beckett, I think you should know some things. Could I drive up? I told him yes. He arrived at 9. He brought a banker's box and a pot of homemade bean dip. He sat at the kitchen table with Neve and me. He drank a cup of black coffee. He told me everything. The Maplebrook Reserve HOA board had been meeting privately twice a month since the spring of 2023 to discuss what Lucinda referred to as the Withington question. The board had explicitly strategized about how to pressure me to remove the dam. The fines were the chosen instrument. The board had voted, 4-2, to assess the fines knowing they had no statutory authority. Hobart was one of the 2 votes against. The Phase 2 development plan was real and active. Quentin had been working with a Burlington architect to design the 30 lakefront homes that would sit on what was currently my pond bed. The architect's renderings showed luxury homes priced at $1.8 to $2.3 million each. But the most damning thing Hobart had brought me was a folder of insurance documents. Quentin Marbury had purchased a commercial general liability insurance policy on Maplebrook Reserve, LLC, in 2018 that included a specific flood damage exclusion for any flood event caused by removal, breach, or modification of the Withington Mill Pond Dam. The exclusion had been added to the policy at Quentin's specific request and at additional premium. Quentin had known, in 2018, that removal of my dam would flood his development. He had paid extra for an insurance policy that would not cover him when it happened. Why? Hobart pulled a second folder. In 2021, Quentin had purchased a separate flood damage insurance policy on the future Phase 2 development through a Bermuda-domiciled captive insurer called Marbury Holdings Risk Limited. The Bermuda policy explicitly covered flood events arising from upstream dam removal and would pay out a guaranteed minimum of $2 million per affected residence in the event of a federally declared flood disaster. Quentin had been planning for the flood. He had been counting on me to remove the dam. He had been counting on the resulting flood. He had been counting on the federal disaster declaration. He had been counting on the Bermuda payout. And he had been counting on using the Bermuda payout to buy out the flooded Phase 1 homeowners at distress prices and consolidate the property for Phase 2. The flood was the business plan. I sat at the kitchen table for a long minute. Neve said one sentence, "Beckett. They were going to do this to their own neighbors." Hobart Twining nodded. He said, "Mr. Withington, I would like to testify." Cormac Twombly took Hobart's files to the Vermont Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division at 9 in the morning the following day. The Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection was a man named Lachlan Quigley. He had been working insurance fraud and real estate fraud at the AG's office for 15 years. Cormac and I sat with him for 3 hours. Lachlan read every page of Hobart's documentation. When he finished, he said one sentence, "Mr. Withington, I am going to need every document Hobart Twining can produce, every recording you can lawfully obtain, and a sworn affidavit from your hydrology consultant. The Bermuda captive arrangement is sophisticated insurance fraud. The Vermont fines are conspiracy under color of HOA authority. The combination is a federal RICO case." He told me the AG's office would coordinate with the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, and the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Vermont. He told me a federal indictment was likely within 90 days. He told me one more thing. "Mr. Withington, we need the dam removal to proceed on schedule. The dam removal itself is the demonstrative act that proves the conspiracy. We need it documented to evidentiary standards. We need cameras. We need the ANR engineer on site. We need Hobart Twining's affidavit notarized before the removal begins." I told him yes. Thora Westbrook agreed to deploy 2 ANR field engineers to the site for the full 3-day removal process. Tamsin Holyoke would lead. A second engineer named Indigo Cassidy would document the procedural compliance frame by frame. Cormac contracted with a videography firm out of Burlington to set up 4 high-resolution cameras with cellular uplink, covering every angle of the removal. Neve called Ardith Beaumont at the Lamoille River Watershed Conservancy. Ardith had been the executive director of the Conservancy for 11 years. She had been advocating for natural stream restoration along the lower Lamoille tributary since 2014. She and Neve had served together on a Vermont maple syrup and water quality joint task force in 2019. Ardith committed her organization as a project partner. She would manage the post-removal natural stream channel restoration. She would also coordinate with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife on brook trout habitat restoration in the dewatered pond bed. Sigrid Walcott at the Burlington Free Press was the third call. Sigrid was 41. She had won 2 New England Newspaper of the Year awards for investigative reporting between 2019 and 2024. She had been covering Lamoille County for 9 years. She came up to the mill house Friday morning at 10. I gave her everything Hobart had brought. I gave her every ANR document. I gave her every fine letter from Lucinda Marbury. I gave her Quentin's 2018 insurance policy with the dam removal exclusion and his 2021 Bermuda flood policy with the upstream dam removal coverage. She read for 4 hours. She said one sentence. "Beckett, I have a front-page story for the Sunday morning edition, the week before your dam removal. Are you ready for that?" I told her yes. The story ran on July 20th. The headline was, "Vermont developers' Bermuda insurance suggests flood was always the plan." The story was 4,200 words. It named Quentin Marbury, Lucinda Marbury, and Maplebrook Reserve LLC. It documented the fines, the hydrology study, the Phase 2 development plan, and the Bermuda captive insurance arrangement. It quoted Hobart Twining on the record. It hit doorsteps in Lamoille County on a Sunday morning. By Sunday afternoon, the Vermont Attorney General's office had filed an emergency civil action seeking a freeze on Maplebrook Reserve LLC's assets. By Monday morning, Quentin Marbury's commercial real estate lender, Vermont Mutual Trust Bank, had frozen his credit lines. By Tuesday afternoon, the Burlington branch of the FBI Public Corruption Squad had subpoenaed the Bermuda captive insurer's records. By Wednesday, 3 of the 4 Maplebrook Reserve HOA board members had publicly resigned, citing the article. Lucinda Marbury did not resign. By Friday, August 13th, the dam removal was scheduled to begin at 6 in the morning on Monday, August 15th. I sat on the porch with Neve Sunday evening. The sun went down behind the hardwood ridge. The frogs called from the mill pond. Tarquin's anvil clanked in the carriage house. He was forging a commemorative iron plaque for the dam, a brass inlaid piece that would be set in stone at the restored stream bank after the removal was complete. Neve poured us each a small glass of maple-aged Vermont rye. She raised her glass. She said, "To Hosea, and to the man who knew when to take down what he had been keeping up." We touched glasses. The frogs kept calling. In the 11 days between the Sunday Free Press story and the scheduled dam removal, Lucinda Marbury made 4 serious mistakes. The first arrived in Vermont Superior Court on Tuesday morning. Maplebrook Reserve HOA filed an emergency civil action seeking a temporary restraining order against the dam removal. The complaint alleged that I had engaged in coordinated efforts to weaponize Vermont environmental regulations to inflict mass property damage on the Maplebrook Reserve community. The judge assigned to the case was Honorable Galen Trowbridge, who had served on the Lamoille County bench for 26 years and who happened to have been my high school classmate at Hyde Park Union High School in 1979. Judge Trowbridge denied the TRO from the bench at 3:45 Tuesday afternoon. He cited my fully approved Vermont stream alteration permit, my landowner rights under Vermont's water law, and the HOA's prior fines, explicitly demanding the dam's removal. He added a stern paragraph to his order, admonishing Lucinda Marbury for filing in bad faith after having demanded the same action for 2 years. He awarded Cormac Twombly $22,000 in sanctions. The second mistake arrived on Thursday afternoon, when Lucinda Marbury organized a Maplebrook Reserve resident protest at the foot of my driveway. 14 residents in matching Navy Maplebrook Reserve polos showed up with hand-painted signs that read, "Save our homes, stop the dam removal," and one that just said, "Beckett, don't," in red marker. I watched them from the porch. They protested for 41 minutes. Neve walked down the gravel drive at 3:28 in a wool barn coat she had owned since 1991, and a pair of leather work gloves. She did not carry a sign. She did not speak loudly. She walked to the head of the protest. She stopped 6 feet from Lucinda Marbury. She said one sentence, slow enough that the local cable news crew that had shown up for the protest could film it. "Mrs. Marbury, you spent 4 years sending letters demanding my husband remove this dam. He is doing what you asked. Go home." She turned around. She walked back up the driveway. The protest dispersed at 4:06. The third mistake came on Friday morning at 6 a.m. when Quentin Marbury arrived at Burlington International Airport with a carry-on bag, a leather briefcase, and a one-way Air Canada ticket to St. George's, Bermuda. The FBI Public Corruption Squad was waiting at the gate. Quentin Marbury was placed in federal custody at 6:43 on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The leather briefcase contained $23,000 in cash and the original Bermuda captive insurance certificate. Lucinda Marbury was not at the airport. She had refused to leave Vermont with him. By Friday evening, the Vermont Attorney General's office had unsealed a formal indictment naming Lucinda Marbury, Quentin Marbury, 3 Northeast Floodplain Consulting hydrology engineers who had signed the fraudulent 2018 study, and 2 Bermuda-based attorneys. The fourth mistake came on Sunday evening, August 14th, at 9:15. Lucinda Marbury, having had everything stripped from her over the previous 72 hours, drove her Range Rover Velar up the Withington Mill Road and parked at the dam itself. She did not get out at first. She sat in the driver's seat for 40 minutes. Then she got out. She walked to the spillway. She stood at the edge of the mill pond. I watched her from the porch through binoculars Neve had given me for my 60th birthday. She picked up a rock. She threw it into the pond. She picked up a second rock. She threw it. She picked up a third rock and tried to throw it at the spillway gate. It missed. She started to cry. I walked down the gravel drive in my work boots and a plain canvas jacket. I stopped 20 feet from her. I said one sentence. "Mrs. Marbury, the dam comes out in 9 hours. Go home." She looked at me. She did not say anything. She walked back to her Range Rover. She drove away. I stood at the dam for a long minute alone. The frogs called from the mill pond. I told my great-great-grandfather Hosea thank you. I walked back up the gravel. Neve was on the porch with a cup of black coffee and a thermos of fresh maple syrup she had pulled from the spring's batch. She said, "Beckett, tomorrow." I said, "Tomorrow, Neve." We sat there on the porch until the moon cleared the hardwood ridge. Monday morning at 5:30. The sun rose over the hardwood ridge at 6:01 Eastern Daylight Time. I had been awake since 4. Neve was in the kitchen making oatmeal with maple syrup from her father's evaporator. Tarquin had been at the forge since 2:30, preparing the commemorative iron plaque. The 4-camera videography rig had been set up since Sunday afternoon. Wide shot of the dam, close shot of the spillway gate, drone overhead, and one pointed at the rebuilt mill that would soon lose its water power. At 5:45, Tamsin Holyoke and Indigo Cassidy from Vermont A&R Dam Safety arrived in a state pickup. Lachlan Quigley from the Attorney General's office arrived right behind them. Ardith Beaumont from the Lamoille River Watershed Conservancy followed in a Subaru wagon with 3 field technicians and a cooler of brook trout fingerlings for post-removal release. At 6:15, the licensed Vermont dam removal contractor, a small outfit out of Stowe called Granite State Stream Restoration, pulled up with 2 excavators, a lowboy trailer, and a crew of 7. The crew chief was a 48-year-old woman named Rowan Cleary, who had supervised over 40 Vermont dam removals in her career. She had been involved in the 2014 removal of the Holden Dam on the Winooski. She knew her business. She walked the dam with me at 6:45. She asked me one question. "Beckett, you ready?" I told her yes. The first step was a slow drawdown of the mill pond. Rowan opened the spillway gate fully at 7:07. The pond began to lower at approximately 4 inches per hour. This phase would last 28 hours. By Tuesday afternoon at 1 p.m., the pond bed was visible across roughly 40% of its original footprint. The remaining water was confined to the original stream channel where Beaver Branch had run before my great-great-grandfather built the dam in 1872. At 3 p.m. Tuesday, Ardith's crew began releasing brook trout fingerlings into the newly exposed stream channel, 87 fish in total. Each one had been raised at the Lamoille Hatchery on White's Brook outside Roxbury. Each was a native strain that had been absent from the lower Lamoille tributary since the late 1880s. By Wednesday morning, the pond was empty. The excavators began the actual structural removal at 8 a.m. Wednesday. They worked at a pace that allowed Tamsin and Indigo to inspect each layer of the earthen embankment as it came down. Soil samples were taken every 6 inches. The original 1872 stone keyway was photographed, documented, and preserved in place at the bottom of the excavation. The dam was structurally removed by Thursday evening at 5 p.m. By Friday at noon, the natural stream channel had been graded into a meandering, low-flow path that mimicked Beaver Branch's pre-1872 course. Native vegetation was planted along the banks by a crew of Lamoille River Watershed Conservancy volunteers, including 6 high school students from the Stowe Mountain School. Beaver Branch began running freely through the property for the first time in 153 years. I stood on the porch Friday evening with Neve and Tarquin and a glass of maple-aged Vermont rye. We watched the new stream catch the late evening light. Tarquin set the brass inlaid iron commemorative plaque he had forged in stone at the bank Saturday morning. The plaque read, "Withington Mill Dam, built 1872 by Hosea Withington, removed 2025 by his great-great-grandson Beckett, returned to Beaver Branch. That same Saturday afternoon, the National Weather Service Burlington office issued a flash flood watch. A slow-moving low-pressure system was tracking up from the Carolinas. Saturated soil conditions across the Lamoille watershed. Predicted rainfall accumulation Sunday night through Monday morning, 4 to 7 inches. The 50-year storm event was forecast for Sunday into Monday, 24 hours after the Withington Mill Dam ceased to exist. I sat on the porch with Neve. She said one sentence. "Beckett, they are about to find out what your dam was for." I said, "Yes, ma'am." The storm started Sunday evening at 6. The first inch of rain fell between 6 and 8. By 10, the National Weather Service had upgraded the watch to a flash flood warning for the entire lower Lamoille tributary. By midnight, the second inch had fallen. The lower Lamoille tributary, at the upstream edge of Maplebrook Reserve, crested its bank at 1:47 Monday morning. I had been awake on the porch since 10 Sunday night listening to the radio. The first emergency call to the Lamoille County Sheriff's Office came at 2:09. A Maplebrook Reserve resident in Phase 1 reporting 2 inches of standing water in her basement. By 3 a.m., 7 homes were taking water. By 4, 13. By 6, 23. The Vermont National Guard's Lamoille County Emergency Response Team deployed at 4:45. They evacuated the lowest elevation Maplebrook Reserve homes by deuce-and-a-half military truck. No injuries, no deaths. 41 residents were transported to an emergency shelter at the Hyde Park Elementary School. By dawn Monday, the water at the upstream edge of Maplebrook Reserve had reached 4 feet above flood stage. Sigrid Walcott from the Burlington Free Press arrived at 6:15 with a photographer. She filmed the National Guard evacuation. She filmed the flooded streets. She filmed the kayak dock from Maplebrook Reserve, floating sideways down the lower tributary. By 8 a.m. Monday, 3 Vermont Network affiliates and the Boston ABC affiliate were on site. The story was simple. 23 luxury homes in a development that had been permitted on a 2018 hydrology study, explicitly relying on an upstream dam, had been flooded after that dam was removed, under a Vermont stream alteration permit issued in response to the development's HOA filing 4 years of fines, demanding the dam's removal. The story explained itself. Sigrid Walcott interviewed me on the porch at 10:05 Monday morning. She held up her microphone. "Mr. Withington, 23 Maplebrook Reserve homes flooded last night. The HOA spent 4 years fining you to remove your dam. What would you say to Mrs. Marbury today?" I thought about it for a long second. I held up 2 pieces of paper. The first was the original 2024 $50,000 fine letter Lucinda Marbury had mailed to me, demanding the dam's removal. The second was the certified Vermont stream alteration permit Thora Westbrook's office had issued me on the 14th of June. I held them where the camera could see them. I said, "Mrs. Marbury fined me $50,000 for an unsightly impoundment structure on my property. She demanded I remove it. The state of Vermont issued me a permit to do exactly what she demanded. I removed the dam properly, with state oversight, on a published schedule that her HOA was notified of in advance. The flood that destroyed her neighbors' homes last night was the consequence of the action her HOA demanded for 4 straight years. I am sorry for the families who have lost property. I am not sorry I followed the law." I set the papers down. Sigrid lowered the microphone. The camera held on the rebuilt mill in the background. The morning sun caught the cedar shingles. The new natural stream channel ran past the mill, where the dam had been 48 hours earlier. By Monday at noon, Lucinda Marbury was at the Lamoille County Sheriff's Office, voluntarily turning herself in on a federal indictment that had been unsealed Sunday morning, while Vermont was already getting wet. By Tuesday at 6 p.m., Quentin Marbury's bail had been denied for the second time. He would remain in federal custody at the Northern New Hampshire Correctional Facility in Berlin until trial. By Wednesday at 3 p.m., the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources had revoked Maplebrook Reserve LLC's Phase 2 development permit, citing fraudulent hydrology study representations in the original 2018 filing. By Thursday, FEMA had declared the Lamoille County flooding a federal disaster. By Friday, the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation had filed an emergency administrative action against the Bermuda captive insurer, for unlicensed business in the state of Vermont. By the following Monday, the Maplebrook Reserve HOA Board had been formally dissolved by the Vermont Secretary of State for failure to seat a quorum after Lucinda Marbury's federal indictment. Quentin Marbury pleaded guilty in February to 14 federal counts, spanning wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, fraudulent hydrology disclosure, and obstruction. 9 years federal at FCI Berlin in New Hampshire. Lucinda Marbury pleaded guilty in April to conspiracy, accessory to wire fraud, filing fraudulent administrative claims under color of HOA authority, and 1 count of mail fraud. 3 years state prison at the Vermont Department of Corrections facility in Chittenden, 1 year before parole eligibility. Marbury Holdings Risk Limited, the Bermuda captive insurer, was administratively dissolved by the Bermuda Monetary Authority in May after the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, the FBI, and the United States Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control jointly pursued the case. The $2 million per residence flood event premium that Quentin Marbury had been planning to collect was paid instead, by court order, directly to the 23 flooded Maplebrook Reserve households via a Vermont court receiver. Each flooded family received approximately $2 million in immediate restitution. 21 of the 23 families used the funds to elevate their homes above the new flood elevation, in compliance with the post-removal hydrology study, Vermont ANR, issued in October. The 2 families who declined to elevate sold their homes back to the state of Vermont under the new floodplain buyout program. Their parcels were converted to public conservation land, managed by the Lamoille River Watershed Conservancy. Maplebrook Reserve, LLC, was dissolved by court order. The Phase 2 60-acre parcel, the upstream meadow Quentin had planned to develop on my dewatered pond bed, reverted to Vermont's current use program as designated open space. The Lamoille River Watershed Conservancy now manages it as the Lower Meadow Restoration Corridor. Hobart Twining ran for the reconstituted Maplebrook Reserve HOA Board in October and won unopposed. He served 2 years as the new board's first president. He capped HOA dues at $55 per month and required an independent annual audit. I rebuilt the Withington Mills water power using a small in-stream kinetic turbine designed by the engineering school at the University of Vermont. The turbine sits at the base of a low rapids 200 yards downstream of the original dam site. It generates approximately 7 kilowatts continuously and powers the mill without requiring any impoundment. The mill runs every Saturday from May through October. Visitors come from across New England. The Vermont Historical Society added the rebuilt mill to its Heritage Sites tour in June. Neve and I established the May Withington Memorial Stream Restoration Trust in May. The trust funds dam removal and natural stream restoration projects on Vermont's smaller waterways. Neve chairs the board. Ardith Beaumont serves as vice chair. Tarquin forges a commemorative iron plaque for every restored stream site. 11 plaques so far, 18 sites identified for restoration over the next 10 years. The first restoration funded by the trust was a small 1908 abandoned mill dam on Stannard Brook in Caledonia County. The brook now runs free for the first time in 117 years. Native eastern brook trout returned within the first spring. Tarquin married a sugarmaker's daughter from Hardwick in September. They had a daughter in March of the following year. They named her Hosea, after my great-great-grandfather. She has May's eyes. Last night, the 3 of us, Beckett, Neve, and Tarquin, drove down to a diner in Hyde Park called the Village House. We ate Vermont cheddar grilled cheese on sourdough and tomato bisque at the counter, under a ceiling fan that had been there since 1962. The jukebox played Patty Griffin. We drove home with the windows down. The August air smelled like cut hay and rain on hemlock. A barred owl crossed the road in front of our headlights and disappeared into a stand of yellow birch my great-great-grandfather would have recognized. I'm Beckett Withington. That was my great-great-grandfather's dam. That was my first wife's name. That was my son's plaque. That was my second wife's resolve. That was the dam I took down when the HOA asked me to.
Lucinda Marbury didn't fall because Beckett Withington got loud. She fell because Beckett Withington gave her exactly what she asked for. For 4 years, she has been sending him $50,000 fines, demanding he remove his great-great-grandfather's 1872 dam. And not once in those 4 years did anyone behind her stop to ask the basic question: what was the dam doing for the people downstream? Beckett didn't beat her with anger. He beat her with compliance. He filed the proper Vermont stream alteration permit. He brought A&R in. He documented the removal frame by frame. He let the next storm show the state of Vermont what the dam had been for. If you ever had an HOA decide they could fine you for something they actually wanted you to do, drop your story in the comments. We hear each other. Hit subscribe. Next week, we head to Coastal Maine, where an HOA tried to bulldoze a man's family lobster pound. Turns out the lobster man's grandfather wrote the state harbor master regulations.